this thing on? Hello, welcome. I am Russ Rapp. This is my YouTube channel about non-duality. And in this conversation, we will be discussing life and death and how that relates to the idea, the concept of non-duality. Before I get into that, I just wanted to do a quick plug. This has nothing directly to do with non-duality, because what really does has to do with non-duality. Every Sunday we watch church online on YouTube. It is through Brook Church, and I would welcome you to check that out. So I will put the link in the description box below. And one of the verses I believe they spoke of today, which I thought was appropriate for non-duality, was in Romans chapter 3, verse 10. Romans chapter 3, verse 10 says, "As it is written, there is no one righteous, not even one. There is no one who understands, no one who seeks God. All have turned away, they have together become worthless. There is no one who does good, not even one." So I guess that was Romans 3, verses 10 through 12. So, like I said, check out Brook Church, and I think you may enjoy it. So, if you are watching live, feel free to ask a question or make a comment in the chat box, and we will get started in 1 second. I'm going to go grab my tea here. So this is the point in some non-dual speakers' live talks where I sit in silence for 5 minutes or just stare at the camera blankly. But I will save you that. I will just fill in that blank space with whatever I say, whatever comes out of my mouth. Oh, and by the way, I want to introduce you. That's another big thing, is showing your pets off. She's been in other videos, but this is our cat. Her name is Princess. Aptly named. But she's a very nice kitty. So, okay, you can sit there. Life and death. It's an interesting topic that maybe people avoid. Maybe they obsess over. Maybe they enjoy talking about at dinner parties. Maybe it's something that they discuss at spiritual circles or in church. What does it mean to be alive? What's the purpose of life? Why are we here? But I think the flip side of that, the more pressing question that people are concerned with, is what happens to me after I die? Well, hello, Monica. Monica says, hello, do you agree with the suggestion that the movie we see is a projection? Oh, I love that question. Are we watching a movie? Kind of the idea of Plato's cave is what we see real. Is this just a movie? Is it a projection of ourselves out onto the world? Is there an objective reality, essentially? And it goes along the lines of life and death. You know, are we watching a movie? I think on different levels, how you approach that question, how you deal with this idea of what is real and what is not real. You know, the Matrix, I've used a lot of times to discuss this topic, but it gives you kind of a framework of how to discuss ideas along certain lines. It gives you kind of a language to use, so you're somewhat agreeing on the terms of the conversation, of the discourse, so it's easier to kind of understand what is being heard and said. It's kind of like when my wife was pregnant with our son. She had two daughters prior to that, but this would have been my first experience with a newborn, and so she had kind of a leg up on knowing how to care for a new baby. And one of the things that helped in the process is knowing or having the same kind of being on the same page with how to discuss it, so the understanding can be had between both parties, me and my wife. And we found one book that was very helpful, and so we used that. It's called Baby Wise, I believe, is the book. And everyone has their own personal feelings, philosophies, and approaches to child rearing. And that's not the purpose that I bring it up, but that book was a framework for us to kind of proceed with our parenting, because prior to that, I think it was me relying on her to kind of take the lead on how to approach raising a newborn, and being able to have a similar outlook or a way to agree upon how to approach things was very helpful, because then it kind of leveled the playing field as far as having a way to talk about it. And so I think with movies like The Matrix or other, philosophies or spiritual teachings, it's simply a way that we can communicate as humans, especially on topics like this, where there's really no way to directly contact the realness of what non-duality is pointing towards. And so we use words as a way to understand it, in a way to communicate with each other, especially on kind of impossible ideas as non-duality. And so when you talk about, are we watching a movie? Is it a projection of ourselves? I think in certain ways, on certain levels, if you will, we are watching a movie in a sense of how we are consuming information on a day-to-day, from moment to moment, especially in the information age, the digital age, the age of social media. We are constantly bombarded with messaging, oftentimes geared towards influencing or changing our opinion, in addition to informing. And so we end up shaping a worldview in a way based on the input that is received and the reaction of the outside world through the output of our communication or our actions in our daily life. And so I think in a certain sense, we are watching a movie because it's a creation of the reality that people want us to see. And that's when referring to the Matrix, that's what a lot of people take away from it, is that the story of the Matrix where the machines take over the world and they scorch the skies, and so the humans have to go underground. Spoiler alert, that's what happens. And then in order for power generation, they use the energy of humans essentially to power their machine cities. And so the Matrix is built as a way to keep people enslaved to the system, to keep them believing their reality. Therefore, the emotions and electrical impulses that are generated continue to sustain life for the silicon machines, if you will. So people see that as a literal sense, like a science fiction novel where that potentially happened or could happen, where machines use humans as batteries essentially. And that's the reality that people are trying to escape. So they're trying to escape this fake mental world of the Matrix, this computer program that has been created by the source or the system itself to keep people in the system. And so to escape to the real world is the story that is on the surface, the one that is portrayed in the movie. However, the allegory is, the Matrix is escaping into the real world is just another kind of construct. It's a, it can be framed as a description of reality versus the story itself. Meaning, if you watch some of the philosophy of the Matrix, they talk about how the physical realm of the real world, the mental realm of the Matrix, and the spiritual realm of kind of the machines, essentially, as kind of a trinity of realities. And so escaping the world of the Matrix into the real world is just an illusion, essentially, in that sense. And so you see the connection to that, where I could babble on about this all day, and I'll try to cut this a little shorter, but the Merovingian in the Matrix, the Lucifer character, the trafficker of information and other things, I'm sure, he is kind of the negative, the how do you say, I don't know how I'm saying this. So the Merovingian in the Matrix is the character of kind of the abstraction of reality, the belief in the fake world, whereas the same basic structure of so if you look at, let me get it to the point here. If you look at the dance, the club, the kind of esoteric imagery of the Matrix world in the Merovingian club, and you compare that to the scene where they're dancing in the caves, there's a clear comparison of that and a connection to that imagery. Monica says, it's hard to believe there are no values. What do you think? Is there a feeling of loneliness? Lewis says, good afternoon. Hello, Lewis. Monica says, thank you. Let me finish this thought a little bit on your first question as far as the movie. So if you look at the Matrix in those ways, you can take the story itself as one meaning, and then you can look at the allegory of of the story itself as another meaning. And so, much like life, if you look at, especially with mass media sources, I mean, now it's a little bit different with social media, but there's still a level of control over the information that you see on a daily basis. If you look at, social media has to create algorithms where there's certain messages or posts that you, pictures, whatever, videos that you see on a daily basis. There's only so many hours in the day. There's so much media produced now by every individual to some extent around the world. Maybe not every individual, but it's not just a few different sources creating this media. It's created by people like me making YouTube videos. So this is one example where you could spend probably every second every day is hours and hours of stuff that you could consume. And so social media has to take that on a daily basis and chunk it into something that you would potentially find value in your daily life. And so there's some crafting, kind of from the movie Social Dilemma, but there's a crafting of the message that you see. But kind of the old way prior to social media and into the current state of media consumption, there's essentially like 6 main giant corporate organizations that control, let's say, 90% of what you see on TV and everywhere else. And that sort of monopoly or oligopoly, group of small companies that run majority of the information you see, there's quite a lot of cohesiveness that comes out of that, where they can control the message in a large scale, especially if the values and projections that they want to cast upon the public are in coordination. So if you have 6 major companies running most of the media in this country and around the world, frankly, then if you have 6 different opinions, 6 different ideas, 6 different ways, worldviews, and that sort of thing, then you can have a variety of information that and an opinion coming as information towards you. But if those 6 companies see the world in the same way, then your limitation on reality is quite extensive, as far as what you're being shown about what's happening around the world is very limited. And if you think about it in terms of right in this moment, right at this time, all the things that are happening around the world that you're not aware of, and you can't even really grasp it, but you can just be open to the idea that you have no idea of what is news, what is happening in the world as we speak in this moment. And so you rely on the world around you, people, conversations, social media, TV news, radio, anything to inform you and instruct you on the world that you see. And with that, it's very limited to only so much. And so if who sets the agenda, who decides what is important, and who is given the power to define what is meaningful to you in your life, that in itself is a movie, is a story that is created and packaged and sent to you via your devices or via your newspaper or however you consume media on a daily basis. And even if you don't have a phone, if you don't have TV, and you're kind of cut off from the world to some extent, unless you're living out in the middle of the nowhere by yourself, you're still in a culture and a society that is shaped by these beliefs. And so you still are influenced by the world around you. But I think right now, you talk about fake news or who's in control of the messaging. I think in a lot of ways we are seeing a movie play out, but it's very similar to this idea of non-duality, where you can use non-duality and make it something that dissociates you from your life and the world and what's happening, and desensitize you to your thoughts, your feelings, who you are as a human being, and kind of be the false Buddha, if you will, thinking that you're I covered this in, I think, my last video, where you're above everything and nothing really affects you because you're some non-dual master. It's the same way with saying, you're watching a movie right now, in a large sense, even in a socio-political standpoint. To say that you're watching a movie, if you take it in a certain way, it can seem insensitive, but it shouldn't downplay the realness of what's happening. And so if someone's controlling the narrative of world events or current events, and it has an effect on your life or the world around you in any way, that doesn't negate the fact that the narrative is created in the first place, and it doesn't negate the realness of your experiences of the world. And so with non-duality, if you say that you're watching a movie, and this is just from the 3D 5 sense world, not even from what I was just talking about as far as media is concerned, but just your reality of your senses interpreting the world around you, to see it as a movie or projection, depending on how you're interpreting what I'm saying, you can see that as being insensitive or uncaring in a way where so if I say there is no person, or the world is an illusion, or separation is an illusion, then you can take that as, well, nothing matters, I can do whatever I want and be kind of disconnected from life. And that's not the point of non-duality. It's kind of in a way the opposite of being more in tune with what is happening, life in the world around you. It's so even if you understand the illusory nature of reality, it doesn't throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, well, then nothing matters, because as human beings, as thinking, breathing, existing organisms, we create meaning in life. We have values. So that goes, Monica, to your other question: is it hard to believe there are no values? What do you think? Is there a feeling of loneliness? And so I say and so much. It's a nice transition. I was just talking to my son Noah about transitions in writing and being more creative versus just listing, first and next and last. For me, it's probably just a habit of saying and so I'll see if I can stop doing that for the rest of the video. The question from Monica is, is there a feeling of loneliness? I think there is a way to want to relate or try to define the experience of others that are going through similar things, because you got to ask yourself, why are you watching this video? Why are you interested in the subject of non-duality? Because I can assure you, in my experience, there's a lot of people that have no clue or have no interest whatsoever in the topic, even if you try to explain it to him, just because that is what it is. And so, see, oh, there it is. There's the transition. There can be a feeling of loneliness, especially if, prior to the digital age, if you were into learning about bugs, like you loved caterpillars and beetles and all sorts of different kind of bugs, flies, mosquitoes, you collected them, you loved talking about them, learning about them, and you lived in a town where no one else shared your interests, and so you try to start a club in your community of bug lovers, and no one shows up because no one really cares about bugs. The only one in your community that really cares about bugs is the exterminator that goes around spraying to get rid of pests. And so there's number 2. I'm counting. So every time I say, "Oh, that was another drinking game I had," was that's another idea for another video of taking a sip every time I say. And so you're in a community where no one cares about bugs. You're the only one. I think in that sense, there can be a feeling of loneliness if you're going through a crisis, or you're struggling, or you're dealing with issues. That may be what is attracting you to this topic. And so that's it's very instructive as far as how does life take place after non-duality, after this grand awakening or enlightenment, whatever you want to call it. It goes on much the same as it did before. You still have habits and ways of seeing the world, and you still have a body and that sort of thing. And so people who are looking to change something and trying to find that through non-duality will be sorely disappointed, because what is irregardless of you wanting to change something. So is there a feeling of loneliness? There can be. I mean, I think for me personally, I like doing these talks because it's something, a topic that I'm interested in, and finding other like-minded people as yourself and discussing something of this nature. And that is a great segue into the topic of specifically of life and death. And I started at the beginning of the video with some questions as far as, what does it mean to be alive? What is aliveness? What happens after I die? What is death? And if you look at what is, that which doesn't change, the absolute, that which appears to change has no permanent solidity. So who is asking the question, what happens after I die? And is it a concern of what is? And so if you look at, that's number 4. If you look at your body, so if you identify with this body, not necessarily in the name of Russ Rapp or prior to even the thought of this body, but it seems as though this is alive because it's animated, it's moving. it's breathing, and you can witness other individuals who die where this stops. And so the question, I guess, is, if you identify with the body, what happens, what appears to happen after someone other than who you identify with as a body? What happens to them after they die? And, without getting into all the morbid processes of how the body breaks down, essentially, the animation, the movement, the life seems to stop, and everything breaks down, and you can say it turns to dust, essentially, or gets eaten by microbes and worms and whatever. And so you already know from that standpoint what happens after you die. Your body goes away, essentially. What you perceive as your body changes to the point where, if you were to ask yourself, do I identify with that? Especially if you get cremated, you just turn into literal ashes. You would say, well, that's not me. And so that which you identify with currently, the body, takes on a form that you would probably logically agree doesn't exist in the sense of being alive. And yet, those ashes, or the body that's pumped full of fluids to, preserve you for a period of time, the organs that start to liquefy, all of that stuff, still exists in what we would call reality in this world. And so the form, the animation changes, and yet the material itself is still here. It's kind of like the law that says, energy can change, but it cannot be created or destroyed, or whatever that law is from a scientific perspective. And so the body breaks down. You don't identify with that. It's okay. So, well, I'm not the body. Okay, then we get into spiritual ideas or religion to tell you what happens after you die. So, so I'm going to die, and then this happens. And so when you say I die, and then this happens, in a sense, that's a story. And you can base that on your own imagination, your own creativity, ancient texts. You can base that on other people who said they have died and come back, seen light. You can base it on stories passed down. You can try to logically figure out what happens after you die. You can use science, if you will. So that which is not the body, which you identify with, you tell a story of what happens after the body dies. And so there's a separation, disconnection of the body and what we would maybe call, some people will call, the soul, let's say. So then what is the soul? So now, logically, in the mind, we're trying to figure out what happens after we die. We say, okay, well, we're not the body, because that just disintegrates, deteriorates into a big, mess of stuff. Julio Salinas, hello. Talking about death. And so now, in this discussion of trying to seek what happens after we die, trying to understand it logically, intellectually, abstractly, we say we're not the body. And so now we're this soul, we're this personality, we're this structure that exists separate from the body. And so That's number 5. Is anyone counting? Or who's taking sips? Well, I guess it's not. Well, it's afternoon. It's Sunday, so maybe you're drinking some Mogan David. I don't know. So at this point in time, we look at dying and death from the standpoint of something separate from the body. And so number 6, from a scientific, let's say, objective perspective, we look at death and say, well, the body has died, and all those electrical impulses, the energy of the body has now died, and therefore that which we identify with from a spiritual standpoint, calling a soul, that dies as well from a scientific perspective. And so number 7, when the separate identity, the mind, the soul, is connected to the body and dies with the body, therefore there is nothingness that can be identified with after death. So science would say, and this is just generalizing, that the body dies and the mind, the ego, whatever you want to call it, dies as well. So there is no soul, there is no afterlife, there is no journey, and therefore the body and the mind are connected and dependent solely on one another. But then from a religious spiritual standpoint, we talk about, hey, Emily Ford, VASF Tech. Is that like an ad, or are you a bot? I don't know. I'm not sure what that means. So let's go down the road of saying that there is a soul. And so then what happens to the soul after we die? So that's the word I'll use, is soul. Does it go to some heavenly place? Does it inhabit a new body? Does it go to a different dimension? Does it live in a world of your dreams, of whatever you imagine it to be? Does it live in the world of a certain religious perspective? Is it dependent on whatever you believe, and that's what you see after you die? Are you just some disembodied entity, orb of energy that just lives in ultimate bliss? Is there an experience? Is there a morality? Is there a judgment? All these different questions and concerns comes into play once we separate the body from the soul, essentially. Julio says, it seems the experience of stories goes away when you die. So that's, we're getting there, Julio. So if you just want to wait just a bit. So the story goes away when you die. If you are a body and a mind that's connected, that is merely a physical manifestation, then the experience of stories and everything else goes away when you die. That's what the assumption would be. If there's a separate soul, then the story goes on in some form or another. And then the question I would ask, what is the soul? What is this disembodied or newly bodied entity that you now inhabit after you die in this world, in this form, on earth? What is that? What is it? So we think about, okay, so is it my highest self? Is it my true self? Is it my personality? Is it my ego? Do I just automatically get this sense of bliss or enlightenment, understanding, this sense of peace where all my hang-ups, all my idiosyncrasies, everything in life that maybe I didn't see as being perfect now kind of melts away. And so then it's the core, the essence, the center of the onion with all the peels removed. And so now that's who I identify with. So if you were to see that, or experience that, is that the case? And so that's number 8. When you think in those terms, then now you're disidentifying with the personality or the ego, or the what we identify as a separate self, and now we're pure awareness or pure consciousness, or whatever term you want to say. Therefore, now we're objectifying or disengaging from the personality structures, that which other people would define as you. And if you think about definitions of who you are, you can ask yourself that question, but other people define you as well. So maybe to other people, you're the guy that dropped out of high school, or you're the woman who cheated on her husband, or you're that guy, or you're the guy that sells coffee at the coffee shop, or you're the person who cut me off in traffic, or however other people want to define you, or from a personality standpoint, oh, she's the really nice one, that always gives people gifts, or he's really strong and opinionated, or he's the a-hole that posts all that stuff on social media. Any sort of like projection of how they see you, even if it's superficial, there's a way to try to define you. And as yourself, you see yourself in a different light, from a different perspective, that may or may not be closer to the mark, but most likely it's more of a deeper perspective on your reality of who you define yourself to be. So if we're talking about dying and becoming some sort of perfect example of who you are, some projection of perfection, where you are your most healthy and your most loving state, then it's easy to conclude at that point that the things that you currently identify with, that maybe you're not aware of, the personality, the ego, is not you. And so now you're saying, well, I'm not that. And so after you die, all the stuff that you currently define yourself, all your shortcomings and your or your strengths even, now are not seen as who you are, because now there's some true perfect version of yourself, some level of development that's been reached, some pinnacle of perfection that you define yourself to be. And so all those ways of seeing yourself before on earth, this imperfect human being, is now not you. Julio says, it seems the experience of stories goes away when you die. Oh, I already read that. Yeah, good question. Maybe the identification shift to something else. I think that's ultimately what I'm getting at here is the mind is structured in a way to create meaning, to create an identity. And as you've grown, changed, developed through life, because you've gone through a lot of, if you're as old as I am, you've gone through many stages, and yet the essence of who you are is still there in a way. So that which you see yourself as you, that which doesn't change, this consciousness, this awareness, the ghost in the machine, the soul, seems to always be there, though the manifestation, the personality, the actions, the beliefs, the behaviors, the assumptions, the attitudes can change. But what is this essence that is separate from all of that? Is it a point in space? Is it an energy field? What is that? But as you can see, the questions that I'm asking is a way the mind is trying to seek for understanding, seek for knowledge, trying to gain control back from the life that it feels out of control within. It's the separate self attempting to be the creator, if you will. And ultimately, all these questions for that which is, for what we would say is aliveness, those questions itself is irrelevant and has ultimately no meaning. And so that's number 9. With what you identify as or with exists in time is the thing, the object that wants to remain or continue, or even if it wants to die and be nothing and go into the void, it wants to know that that is the case. There's this need of understanding, this wanting to find the ultimate meaning of life, or knowing that I know what happens after I die, because then that gives me an apparent control over what life is, my own life, because now I'm the master of my own life. I have the keys to the kingdom. I have the holy grail of knowing what happens after I die. So now I can fully engage in life because I have that secret inner knowledge, the esoteric truth that I've been seeking. So now I am not a child of God. Now I am like God. I am a godly figure, and I can stand on my own. Julio says, yeah, but then again, anything is irrelevant. Questions about relevancy are concepts in the dream, as anything else we can word. Aliveness is a word. the essence, the state of being alive, life and death. That which does not change. What does not change? Everything that appears changes. So if we are the absolute, if we are part of aliveness, is there any concern of being apart from that, separate from that, lost forever in the void of nothingness? And I think words, like you're saying, ultimately can cover up the basic understanding of non-duality that is so apparent it doesn't take an hour to explain on a YouTube video. How do you know that you're alive, that you're real? I can assure you, you are a character in this movie. What happens after you die? What happens after the self falls away? That you are no longer you? This. Would this ever be concerned with what happens after this? What are you holding on to? What is it that you seek? What does it matter that your identification as a separate self exists into the future or into infinity? Why is that important? Is it more important to live the dance, to be a part of this? Does holding on to the idea, the beliefs about death, does that help you to fully embody life, to be present? Does it matter to be present? Do you want to be more present? Do you want to be here now? The power of now? Who wants to be here? And we can talk about this being a dream world, Neo. Life is but a dream. But the dream is real to those being dreamed. So the only way to say that it's but a dream is to be outside of the dream itself, because within the dream exists. The importance, the meaning comes from the dream itself. So how do you escape the matrix? How do you get out of this dream? What if there's no way out? What then? What if there is only life and there is no death? What if death is an illusion? What if death is a lie? What if eternal life is the only truth? What if infinite love is the only truth and everything else is illusion? What if nothing changes to nothing, like Julio says, and that's everything? What if everything you ever needed is here right now? What if your resistance to letting go is exactly what needs to happen in this moment? Can you be that? Can you live that? Can you accept that? I'm going to get just a little bit more tea and then I'll be back and wrap it up. So if you have any other things to say.